We recently had the opportunity to bring on as a client an amazing 66-year-old man and his lovely wife. I'm thrilled to be able to work with them over the next few decades. They've saved about $1.6 million, and I'm going to take some time to walk you through some of the most critical planning considerations that we went through together with them. My goal is that it will help you think through some of the most important planning considerations that you will have to, or at least should, tackle as you enter retirement. And also so you can see what's possible. Your situation won't be exactly like this client's, of course, but I bet you'll be surprised by the number of similarities and ideas you'll gain about what you too, with a little thoughtful planning, can accomplish financially for the remainder of your life. I'm going to jump behind the screen here and let's dive in. So this is the plan that I put together for John and Mary. We use a lot of various softwares, pay for a lot of various softwares to help us come to specific conclusions about specific planning ideas. But broadly, I've found for most clients that plugging it into a spreadsheet like this has been most helpful for them. So this was just a basic overarching summary of their primary goals. They want to start a stress-free retirement soon. I mean, who doesn't? They want to not get killed in taxes. That's top of mind for him. He's stressed about that. They want to maintain dignity and independence in retirement. He also wants to buy a nice luxury car within 5 years of retiring. And then he wants to be able to leave some money behind to his daughters. He feels like all of that is possible. It definitely is. So we wanted to walk through his best options to be able to accomplish this. But we also want to make sure we're accounting for the various risks that could come up along the way. The risks to which he's exposed. And I've talked about these in several videos. I have a dedicated video for this talking about the 5 risks that financial advisors tend to ignore, often because they don't know how to deal with them. So these are the things that could derail John and Mary in this example, could derail their plan. These are the 5 that I talked about in that video. Sequence of returns risk is also significant, but both of these top 2 are mitigated by the tactical asset allocation strategies that we use. Again, I have a video that you can look into that will link out that you can dive into to better understand the ways that we mitigate these risks. We can't eliminate all of them entirely, but there are ways to, as I said, to mitigate them. And some of them we can't entirely eliminate. Anyway, it's important that you understand these risks. We're not going to go into each of them, all of them here, but you can review this list or you can watch this video to make sure you're fully acquainted with them as you prepare for your retirement. So this was a more detailed summary of their overarching financial situation today and what they're trying to accomplish now with all of that in mind, with their goals and the risks in mind. So they have several Roth accounts, a couple large Roth IRAs between John and Mary, and then also they have a Roth retirement, a Roth 401k, Roth TSP in this case. John also has a traditional TSP, and there's also an IRA annuity that's sitting there. So if we collect all of these and put them into their tax buckets, we have $770,000 that's tax-free, and then under $900,000 that's tax-deferred. None of his accounts other than just simple savings accounts were in taxable accounts in the middle there. So as I'm sure you're familiar, the tax-free accounts in retirement become your best friend, but the tax-deferred accounts become your worst enemy. Although they were great. You were able to save a lot, was able to grow a lot because of the tax advantages on the front end. But now we have to work around it and figure out how to make that work in retirement. Again, that's probably a conversation for another video, figuring out his Roth conversion strategy that's going to make the most sense for him. But those 2 together give us that 1.6 million that I was referring to. This is what we want to make it do for us. We want to be able to provide them with their income. That was first and foremost top of mind. They would like paychecks coming in. And they already had several, and I was surprised that they still wanted another one on top of it to be able to provide them with a greater peace of mind, just knowing that their basic expenses and a little beyond that it will always be taken care of. They'll always have the paychecks to cover that. Then after that, we wanted to deal with some of these risks. Can we hedge long-term care? Can we hedge inflation? What are our best options there? And with what's left, they wanted to build up, of course, we want to build up their growth bucket, right? Now that we've hedged off, mitigated some of these risks, and we have this income that's steadily coming in, and that's what they're using to live. With what's left, we can be much more aggressive. We can afford to be much more aggressive because during a market downturn, for example, they won't have to pull out of that growth account. They're not depending on that for their everyday living. So we have much more flexibility there. We can have a much more long-term perspective. And so this is the breakdown of the growth bucket here. We're going to have our stock equivalent, which is this aggressive section. We're going to have our conservative, the bond equivalent. And then because this couple is over 1 million in assets, they're able to consider some alternative investments. And there were some that specifically made sense for this particular client. I'll briefly touch on one of those towards the end of this video. But let's dive into some of these subcategories here as we try to build out this plan for this client. So first, we want to look at John and Mary's income sources. So right now, what they have before planning is Social Security, and they also have a couple pensions that you'll see on the planning tab down here once we get to that. But they have decisions to make about their Social Security. The pensions are just they're fixed. They're just gonna pay out what they pay out. Social Security, they can decide whether or not they want to take it at full retirement age or wait until they're 70. They had already made up their mind about what they want to do. Mary's going to take it early. John's going to delay until 70. I agree. That sounds great. For some clients, we're plugging this in as a toggle, and you'll see what I mean when we get to the planning tab, where they could see what does it look like if we filed at 67? What does it look like if we filed at 70? What does it look like if John and Mary do different things, right? How does that impact every other number later on in their retirement? So they can make an informed decision about what would make the most sense going forward. But then on top of that, they have this ability to buy their own pension. And this is through a fixed index annuity with an income rider. And those look really good right now. The way they've structured income riders, for whatever reason, the contractual guarantees are way better than they have been in the past. So the idea here is that you can buy your own pension plan where it's going to pay you every month for as long as either of you lives. And then this is what it looks like at various levels of investment and with different deferral periods. So for this particular client, and you could take it immediately if you wanted, but this particular client was willing to defer at least a year. But we also wanted to evaluate what does it look like after 4 years. You can do whatever time period you want, but you can see the difference here. And it's very scalable, right? So if you put $200,000 in, you get $1,300 a month, $400,000, $2,600 a month, right? You can see that scale here. And so these numbers are going to feed into our planning tab down here, where once we get there, we'll play around with these numbers. And I turn this over to the client so he could explore with his wife and see what made the most sense for them going forward. They could see the impact of putting $600,000 towards this pension plan, or just $200,000, or not having it at all. And they could make an informed decision about what would make the most sense going forward. But just for context, this $5,236 per month for as long as either of them live, that's 10.5% of the $600,000. Now you have to defer 4 years before you get that. So there's that to keep in mind. But the reason why we look at it from that perspective is a lot of people think about the 4% rule, right? If you get to retirement and you have $1 million, you could comfortably pull out, the industry would say, $40,000 a year and not have to worry about running out of money. But now it's considered a dynamic 4% rule, safe withdrawal rate, because sometimes if the market crashes right after you retire, for example, you might need to tighten your belt a little bit more than that. Most of the time you're going to be able to spend more than that, but sometimes you might need to tighten it a little bit more. And it's not dynamic, right? So it's 10% guaranteed for as long as either one of you lives. That's pretty cool. But you can see the impact that these would have on your overarching financial plan in that planning tab, like I said. And then if either of you were to pass away early, whatever's left in the account would go to your designated beneficiary. If you lived a really long time, the paychecks would keep coming. That's kind of the point. Okay, so these are the options for the pension bucket, the income bucket. But what about when we get to the aggressive growth piece? I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I'm not allowed to when speaking to a large audience. One-on-one certainly can, but this gives you kind of an overview, a walkthrough of the way that I think about this, the investment philosophy that I've adopted from my experience over the last 15 years. A lot of it I break down in my book, the problems with the stock and bond portfolio. That's here specifically in myths 9 and 10. That's where you're really going to see the issues that you're going to run into in retirement that might cause you more stress than you should. I have it broken down into a Myth 10 playlist here if you want to go check that out yourself. But that's why we use these tactical asset allocation strategies. I break that down in this video that I referenced earlier. So you have options here for learning more about some of these concerns. But as far as the specifics, I mean, if you were a client, I was taking you through this, I'm going to go ahead and blur this out. But I would walk through these specific historical returns that we've realized from these different accounts. But like I said, I'm going to blur that out because I compliantly can't do that here in this context. But anyway, and that's also going to feed into the planning tab here, which I'll have to blur out there as well. But that's the aggressive growth piece for this client as an alternative to stocks, to just a passive holding of stocks in his portfolio. So then we have the conservative piece, the bond alternative. And that's where if the goal of your conservative piece is to limit your downside, which we're doing with these tactical asset allocation strategies anyway, but bonds can have a negative return some years, and they're increasingly moving in whatever direction the stock market moves, which is not ideal when you're trying to have a conservative piece that's not doing that. Fixed index annuities can provide a solution to that. They are designed where their account value can't go down. So to be able to accomplish this for yourself, you would need to find an annuity that has a guaranteed floor. So 0%, you put in $100,000, it can never go below $100,000. So it needs to be a floor equal to what you invest. It needs to lock in your gains as you have them. And then it needs to have no fees, because the fees could eat into that, even if the market isn't eating into that. So if you have all of those, then you can have something that's guaranteeing you're not going to lose. So for that conservative piece of your portfolio. And then you also want to be able to review the sub-accounts inside this annuity, because that's what is going to give you exposure to potential upside. We have other videos explaining how these things work, how they grow. But the bottom line is they have a floor here where if the market is going down, you can see there's just no growth on these scenarios. But when the market's going up, there's some growth, there's limited growth, there's capped growth, or just participating growth in what the market's doing, not complete. You're not getting the full exposure to what the market's doing, but you're also not having the risk of declines when the market crashes. So you can see that play out here in these lines. It's not the aggressive piece of your portfolio, so I would be okay with the fact that this gray mountain here is surpassing what I would consider my bond alternative, right? That's that conservative piece that's much more dependable for me. Anyway, you can see where that might fit in. So that's that conservative piece. All right, let's get on to the fun part, which is this planning tab here. So let me zoom out here just so you can see a little bit more. Hopefully the numbers aren't too small for you, but this is the overarching allocation, kind of just a summary of the decisions that we're making here. The funds available for the plan, 1.6 million. We need to decide about this pension piece. The client needs to decide if they want some long-term care type coverage. We have that over here as an option. You can see what that would do for him. Do we need that bond alternative? Are we putting any into physical gold? Again, those are all videos that I've explained, why we would make some of these decisions. But that's going to leave us, right now we have zero going, that's what's going to leave us at 1.6 million. But after whatever's left here, we're going to pull out a little bit for an emergency fund. And then we're going to take the rest and put it in that growth bucket, right? So following that sequence that I talked about in that overview tab, that's kind of the thought pattern for how we're going to figure out what goes where. These are the 5 risks, just kind of restated. You got taxes, income, long-term care, inflation, and major market crashes. And so as we adjust these various things, you're going to see some of these will change. So it's the only time I'll mess with the tactical one there, because like I said, I don't want to get into the specific numbers there in a video like this. But this summary here is very helpful as well. What's the total value at 95, just for context, right? Have you run out of money earlier, and then you can go down and see where you ran out of money? Or how much more valuable is whatever decision we're talking about here for your long-term the long-term value of your portfolio. And then we also need to compare that to the income. And I just pulled out randomly at 75 here. Of course, we can look down here at the bottom of the chart to see income at various ages. But what's your income at age 75? So even if you did run out of money at age 85, you do have an income coming in. And so that's also valuable to keep in mind. This particular client has a very high income, even without their pension plan that we're going to talk about purchasing for them. But again, they wanted a little bit more. So we'll come back to all this because that'll help us make a decision later. Here are the decisions that they're going to play around with. Again, this is customized to them. You may have different decisions that you want answers to, that you want to figure out what's going to make the most sense for you. But this is for them with the conversations that we had. They want to see what does it look like at these various levels of investment into an income annuity, for example. They can toggle around the different levels of different time periods of deferral. Does a long-term care type policy makes sense for them. One with a lifetime benefit. Not very many of them have a lifetime benefit anymore, but that's what they wanted to look into. And then after that, we can type in a manual amount for how much is going into a bond alternative. I usually do about 20% of what's left. That's going into their bond piece. And then how much is going to go to start building a gold position. The rule of thumb there is somewhere between 8 to 10%. It depends on the client and their concern with inflation. Again, that's a whole separate video. At the time that we were planning for this client, gold is hitting historical highs. So it was more a conversation of dollar cost averaging into the ultimate gold position that they would like. So we'll get to that in a moment. These are the assumptions that we're using down below. Is there a long-term care event? Yes or no? If we turn that on, then we can adjust the variables here that can affect how much that's going to cost for you. Social Security, cost of living adjustments, inflation, hypothetical return. I usually like to plan for 6%, even though hopefully we're realizing higher. But want to be conservative, and that's what we're seeing here in this growth account down here. Obviously, if the way that we're invested, historically it's realized much higher than that 6%, but I've blacked all of that out so that it doesn't distract from what we're talking about here, and so that I don't get into any compliance trouble, and because legally I can't broadcast that information in a form like this. And then I have his discretionary wants here. They're going to be on monthly through age 80. So an extra $5,000 a month through age 80. Hopefully that's a little bit too much. But then the essential needs are about $7,000 a month. So yeah, let's look through this chart down here as far as what's feeding into everything. You can see that this goes down until age 95. That's what they wanted to plan for. So we're looking at their guaranteed income sources here. We talked about John's Social Security coming on at 70. Mary's birthday is right there at the end of this is John's age. So it's Mary's birthday. She'll turn 67 in 2027. So that's where you see that coming on here. John has a military and a federal pension. She has a state pension. And then right now we have $0 coming in from their guaranteed income annuity. So as we toggle that on and defer for various periods of time, you'll see that adjust down here. That's going to affect their total income. And then we have their basic need, which is coming from those numbers that we looked up here on the assumptions. Their other expenses, we can type in whatever we want here. This is just for their car, right? So that's why I typed that in. So this is the additional need is totaling all of that. The total needed withdrawals is going to factor in any long-term care expenses offset by any benefits. And then that's going to come out of their growth bucket, right? Whatever else they need beyond what their income paid for, we're going to have to pull fund from somewhere, right? So either they're pulling out of their growth bucket or they're putting money back into their growth bucket. So you can see here, whenever they're age 80 and that extra amount, that extra $60,000 a year drops off, you can see that effect. And now their income is more than enough to cover their lifestyle. And so they have a negative need. So it's just money funneling back into their growth account. And then you can see that we're pulling a total value from the various accounts. So let's play around with this. And we're not going to spend a ton of time, but you can see that they could manually adjust their desired income. We could play around with lower rates of return. We could play around with higher inflation and see how that affects things. And we want to make sure that we're protected against as much of this as we can. It's not really the expectation that we're going to be able to head off everything, but we do want to be prepared. We want to be aware of the risks that are out there. And so that's what this is for. So let's real quick just run through some of these so that you can see the difference. So if we go from no guaranteed income from this pension purchase amount here, the fixed index annuity with a guaranteed income rider, to $200,000. So we're going to take $200,000 out of their account value. Let's just go up here so you can watch it come out of their account value. So that's less money that's going to go into their growth account. Okay. And so you can see the difference that makes, but it actually didn't make much of a difference for their value at age 95. And part of the reason for that is that, if you have more of your income being funded here, so have it deferred a year. So right away it's coming on towards the end of this year. And just based on when we started their planning. But yeah, you can see more money dumping into their growth account earlier on. So even though it starts smaller, right? So you have 1.4 million here instead of the 1.6, it had more money funneling into it, less and less strain on it in these earlier years, right? If they defer 4 years, what does that do? Well, they actually have even more money later on and a higher income, right? So you can see the difference here. That's $4,000 extra a year. So not a huge difference, but you can see at 75, that's where it's pulling from. So that would be if crazy things happen and the market crashes and they lose all of their money. Just not going to happen here, but if it did, their income is now $216,000 instead of, if we had no guaranteed income, $196,000. Right? So they increased their income here and increase their value at the end of life based on all these assumptions. A lot of assumptions going in here. This isn't factoring for taxes. It's not factoring for a lot of things. It's just trying to isolate these variables and help make a decision, which, again, we're using other software to help with some of these other decisions. But yeah, hopefully this helps you see some of the difference, the impact that this can play. So even if we put 600,000 here, it's not really affecting this end of life number. It's going to affect the amount that they invest right away, but because they're going to have a greater income, they're able to funnel more into that over the course of their life. Yeah, different considerations that they could make here. Let's just settle it at 400,000. Let's plan on deferring for 4 years. Then they wanted to, they were very concerned about long-term care expenses. We don't have to go, we can do a separate video on this, but this will eat into their total value, of course, right? If we don't turn on a long-term care claim, then it's going to cost money, right? It just costs money. But the way this one works is there's $165,000 premium. If they don't end up using it, so if neither one of them has a long-term care claim, when they die, their heirs are going to get $140,000. That's their death benefit. But if they do end up needing it, their starting monthly benefit is just under $6,000. And then it's going to continue for their lifetime, right? So, and that applies to both of them. So they're not capped on how much it can pay out. So it can help offset some of the expenses. So let's come over here to this variable, this assumption, and let's turn on a long-term care event. And now we can look at the impact that this would have. So here's the expenses. It's based on today's equivalent of $8,000 a month. Looks like it's going out for 8 years here. For the first 5 years, they're going to have benefit from this guaranteed income annuity. It has a long-term care type benefit on top of it, where for 5 years they can get double the payment. So you're going to see some of that come out here. That's going to add on to the lifetime benefit of this long-term care policy. Now, if we took off this long-term care policy, you can see that now with this scenario, they're ending with less money. And you can see where they would end up having trouble here offsetting that. And if we took off the pension plan here, they have even less coming in. Now he uniquely had a long-term care policy from work that covered for 3 years. So that's why that's coming up here. We're trying to account for everything here. But yeah, you can see where that covers for 5 years. And then when we turn on the long-term care benefit, you can see how that would help offset the costs there. Some policies will only last for 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years. This lifetime one, of course, will go out for as long as it's needed. So if we extend that claim out 14 years, just for an extreme, my mom had about a 10-year claim, but so it's not crazy, but you can see the value that would bring, having those checks continue to come in to help offset that risk. If we don't have that here, there's a bigger difference in what it does to their bottom line. And this was just information, context, helping them figure out their comfort level and just to get a better idea of the impact that this could have on their finances and on their retirement, on their legacy. So this is what they ultimately ended up going with, something along these lines. That left us with about $1 million here. So they put about 20% into this bond alternative. And then, like I said, they wanted to start funding that gold position. They just wanted to get a little bit, somewhat hedged towards inflation. But they're not going to do the full amount because they are concerned about the price of gold. I'm concerned about the price of gold coming down, but we're dollar cost averaging into it. It's an insurance. It's not meant as an investment, right? So it's okay if the price of gold comes down in that context because they want it for that future scenario that even though it's unlikely, but if there is some prolonged high inflation or, above what we're projecting inflation or hyperinflation, this would help hedge against that. So very, it can be unlikely, but that doesn't mean that they don't want that protection. So anyway, that's where that piece comes in. So this is the planning scenario that they went through. We also talked about some alternative strategies. Specifically here for this client, we were talking about the use of commercial real estate and a Roth conversion. You can look this up on your own, or I could do a different video on this, but if you're interested, let me know in the comments. And you have to do a lot of research if you're going to pursue a strategy like this. So I'm not recommending this for everyone. You have to do a lot of due diligence. That's why it's only available to accredited investors. But the way that these strategies work is that they use IRA funds to purchase a large real estate investment. And then as that investment is under construction, they get valuations along the way. You get a reduced valuation that you can then convert over to a Roth IRA at that point, at that reduced value. And then later, when the project is done and sells, then you have a higher value on the end. If everything works out well, and you were able to take what maybe was $100,000 on the front end, convert it at $60,000, so you pay taxes on $60,000, and then have that higher value sale later. Again, a lot of nuance here, a lot of due diligence that should be done before pursuing a strategy like that, but that was the strategy that made sense for this particular client. But so here was the total summary, the next steps for John and Mary's plan. I'll zoom back out again for you. So John and Mary's plan, summary and next steps. Here you have that same outlook that we were looking at before, the 1.6 million, based on their selections here on the plan, right? This is just pulling in what they put in their planning document here. If they had put 600, it would have pulled that over. 200,000 would have pulled that over. They had 400,000 here, so that's what we need to get into their income bucket. After that, they wanted to fund that asset-backed long-term care insurance. So we need 165,000 for that. Specifically, the number that we looked at there aligned with the, if you remember, the IRA annuity that they had. So we're just gonna, do that 1035 exchange over from that it's an old annuity into this long-term care strategy. Then they also had $30,000 going to start funding their gold position. Then that left, if you remember, that left us with about $1 million. They wanted to put about $100,000 into that Roth conversion strategy, $200,000 into that accumulation-focused annuity, and that left about $700,000 to go into these tactical asset allocation strategies. So hopefully this gives you an idea of some of the moving parts that go into a well-designed, holistic financial plan. There's a lot of different things that you should be considering. It's not just a one-size-fits-all strategy. It's not just I can take a couple pieces and try to mash them together. They're working together, and we want to consider them that way. There's a lot of different software that we use to help fine-tune some of these numbers, and I didn't showcase all of that here. I'll do it in other videos because the planning process is more than just a 30-minute thing. If there's anything in particular that you'd like to see in more depth that we covered here, but you'd like to understand it better and see that fine-tuned process, then let me know in the comments. And if you haven't watched that video about those 5 risks that most advisors tend to ignore, you should check that out now. I'll see you there.